Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
Okay, so I am joined by returning guest Matt Murrah, my quote-unquote right-hand man, as well as Dapper Zan. So why don't you guys introduce yourself in any way you want, plug yourself, plug whatever you want to plug, and we'll have a really interesting, I'm really excited. I admitted to both of you, I don't know that much about music, so it's outside of my depth, but I think in dialogue between the two of you, I'll be able to glean and maybe comment on a few things. But it's really, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thanks first of all for having me here again, now the second time, and thanks then for coming. I think this would be a very nice discourse. So I'm Matt Murrah. You can find me on X at MattMurrah19. Kabbalah, astrology, tarot, any esoteric thing you want, just hit me up. I'll probably know a little bit about it. But I would say my real thing is connecting that with technology. I think that's where I actually really like stuff, and most recently with music as well. So we'll have a pretty good conversation about this, I'm sure.
Awesome, and thanks, Matt. And then Zan. So Zan is a content creator. Obviously, I don't let him introduce himself, but a really great dude. We've been mutuals for a long time, and I've actually always wanted to work with Zan. So it's great to do this finally. And Zan, plug whatever you want to plug and introduce yourself. Just give a little bit so if people don't know who you are, they can check you out.
Again, also just honored to be here, be part of this community. My name is Alex or Zan. I'm really like, Jin is one of the few people that really got my username right. A lot of people just read it and they see the Dapper and they just call me Dan. So I feel like ever since Jin started calling me Zan, it's kind of it's solidified the username a little bit. And so my username is DapperZan _ on X. That's probably where I'm the most active. And I do have a podcast, The Way of Keys, which is music and metaphysics, and haven't posted to it for a while, but I'm definitely gonna be starting that back up eventually. And I'm really stoked to get into this dialogue. Well, just like trying to think of the things that that we have maybe a shared language around, and relating that to music. And one of the things that I feel is really core to like the process of engaging with music and living a musical life in general is it's come up a lot of the deity of Ganapati, Ganesha, and kind of the aspect of engaging with music that's the skill part of everything, which comes up, of course, in so much more than just music. But I do feel like music is a really potent microcosm and field of this process. And this is where like I feel like I'm not in my depths of like being able to talk about like Ganesha, and so I could use your help. But like I just have some thoughts around like just Ganesh and kind of the mercurial aspect of music that is a big part of it.
Well, I'll be quick, but Ganapati is best understood as mercurial, as you well said, Zan. Also, Matt was teasing me about this because of my own self-described nature, being mercurial. So I, in some ways, relate to Ganapati. So Ganapati is you could say in a broad way that he's the king of aggregates or the king of the outer gate. So the king of the roads or king of the paths, even if you want to say that. So he actually remediates Ketu, so the smoke of delusion, and he also he grants the cities of learning. So I think that's partly what Zan was referring to is like the city of like the outer knowledge learning. So like even just the learning piano for the first time as a child, that's a very Ganapati kind of learning. He also grants the power of Vox city, so gross speech, the densest kind of speech. And he also grants the city of accomplishment, the great city. So meaning that like in an endeavor, in a worldly endeavor, particularly worldly, he will grant a boon in that sort of sephira or area of one's life, like avenue or road of one's life. So in that way, you could also say, and I think this will be interesting for Matt, that he is similar, maybe not the same, but similar to an Eshu. Or maybe he is the king of the Eshu. That's how he would be considered in Tantra. Sort of a wrathful king, but he's not the primary deity. He's very much under his father, who is Mahakala. But in that way, he does function as kind of an outer guardian, outer gatekeeper, and he rectifies the paths. But he also he's known as a dualistic deity because he what he gives to you, he actually takes from another path. So you could say that he remakes the paths, but then there might be an obstacle or the path is lacking at other parts of like a Kabbalistic working or like a quote unquote hero's journey, like traveling through the tree. There are going to be parts missing simply because if you've asked for something, energy can be neither created nor destroyed, right? So he has to draw it from somewhere. So he's kind of drawing it, and if you want to think of it metaphysically, he's drawing from other places of your life. But that's not necessarily bad, because if your focus is to be a musician or to be accomplished or to be sort of a worldly performer, then that's great because he can help you do that.
Yes, I would say definitely there is some connection to what you mentioned about Ganesha and the issues. So not the issues, because there are two ways of seeing. There's the issue, and there's the issue kind of like category of entities. Let's call it this way. So with the issue thing, or which we could place on Hod, for example, on Mercury and so on and so on, they would pretty much be connected. I completely agree. And it's interesting because like music has a lot of components to it, right? It's not just one thing. So you can say, for example, music theory and the lyrics of music, if the music has lyrics, it would be pretty much the Hod work you would do, right? The Mercury work. And you can also say that the emotional side, so maybe the performance, so when you actually go and play the song, or when you want to place some emotion into it based on how you use the music theory, for example, because if you just use it as kind of like a computer, maybe it won't be necessarily a good music. It would just be, again, music following music theory. But you can say that when you're using the emotion or performing, then you would have Netza or Venus, right? The other side. And even in another way, something that really interests me personally about music most recently is that, again, like any of the arts that we have, they pretty much all have the same foundation. They just express it in different ways. So you could say that there are connections, or you can relate music or the musical notes with the colors, for example, or with shapes of architecture and so on. So that was actually what started to drag me into this, because there's this book that I've been translating, and I mean, I've read it in its original language, or not original language, but the original translation, let's say, and now I'm trying to translate it from Portuguese into English. So the book is called The Archaeometer, and the idea is that you have this tool that tries to make the synthesis then of the connections between the different colors and musical notes and the alphabets, like the Hebrew alphabet, the Arab alphabet, the Sanskrit of Devanagari, and so on. And to me, when I first understood this, it was like, okay, cool. There's some connection. Maybe you can say Do is like red and some other note is green. Yeah, cool. Like at a conceptual level, that's cool. But then it struck me that not only the actual data, the information about the notes and the colors can be correlated, but then their relationships also can be correlated. So for example, if you say that red and green as colors, they have too much contrast, maybe in music that translates to whatever, if you're using, for example, the circle of fifths, whatever two notes that you place, then it wouldn't matter necessarily the color, but let's say you place Do in the red one, and you would play, if you continue with the circle of fifths, you would play G flat on the green one, right? Just following colors, because you have 12 and 12 main colors as well. And then you see the same relationship of like contrasting being applied there on the music, because they would be tritones. So then, like when I understood that from that point of view, I was like, what the hell? So now music became this super interesting thing, even if, let's say, I don't know necessarily how to play it that well or compose or whatever. It just became much more interesting, because then now you can see the correlations, right? So I don't know if that's something that Zen or Eugen thought about or played with before, like this idea of corresponding things. But I think that's a very interesting topic as well.
Well, I definitely didn't think about it in such an articulate way. So let me cop to that. But then also, you did relate it in a way that I could understand and that I could follow along in a stuff-erratic way. And I think you knew that as well. Even though I again know nothing about music or music composition or music theory. But it is interesting what you said about lyricism and Hode, that sort of that kind of writing action, the act of writing lyrics, that would come from Ganapati. That would be like a typical boon, like the ability to write in interesting and popular ways, particularly.
Yeah, and just to just tie in some other things that I think about Ganapati as he relates to this, is like there's this like this sense with music and with any art, it's like you take in these fundamentals, right, and then they can kind of relate across each other, and so there's this so like the gana, right, is like it's translated as like categories or like categorization. And just an interesting thing, like even in the like Chinese, I was reading like a Chinese medicine book, and they have a word gung, which is Ganapati's bija, for, again, like categories. And so that's what I feel like is such a big part in music, is kind of like being eternally like a beginner to these fundamental categories, and like sitting in these intervals of like a fifth and a third, and like meditating on that. And that's how a lot of like Indian classical music is trained, is like just spending all this time singing in unison or singing in different intervals to a root fundamental. And I just also wanted to bring in just what Matt was saying of like, so music and sound, it maps into light, right? And so like and one interesting thing that I found in just kind of researching like what is the metaphysics of music, the first thing that really came up was some of Rudolf Steiner's work, and one of the first people that he cites is Schopenhauer. And I don't know much about Schopenhauer except for his kind of thoughts on music, and I think that this is an important thing that does set music distinctly apart from all the other arts, is that Schopenhauer was saying that it's unlike painting or something with words, where there are these in between mediums, like the artist receives some divine message, and then they have to interpret it through these mediums. With the music, he was saying that it's like there's no it arrives as in the same kind of language that it was conceived in, and so there's this direct access. He like so yeah. That makes music kind of unique apart from other arts. Is that it's he was saying it in terms of it's music is an immediate and objectification and copy of the whole will as the world itself is, and and the other arts have that kind of intermediary language of translation where there's information that maybe gets compressed, and so that came to mind.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think it's really interesting what you're saying, Zan, and to tie it with Matt said, is that Ganapati would be sort of the deity to guide you through like the densities, like Matt was talking about the different colors. Well, that's what Ganapati would do. He would take you to each different layer. He would be like if you want to think of it, I always give this example, but Old City Kathmandu. Old City Kathmandu is actually made as a mandala, but it's made as like a secret tantric mandala, not like one of the normie ones that people are used to. So the whole idea is that you go through the city, physically go through the city, but you're actually going through metaphysical processes as you pass through each gate. So that's it's the best, most concretized metaphor, and that's also makes sense for Ganapati as he is the Lord of Roads. So I relate to what he's saying, and it's very funny that you bring up Schopenhauer because I got into heated discourse about the nature of Schopenhauer and Dharma on a different episode, but I digress. I think what Matt said was really interesting in the sense of like there's so much Kabbalistic work done on the sort of nature of music, the nature of relationality, the nature of relating Sephira to notes. And of course, we have the same idea in Tantra. Now, it doesn't come from Ganapati, it actually comes from his mother. So, this actually is interesting for what Matt said, because tantric music would come from Matangi or Nila Tara or Nila Saraswati. She's known by all those. But it can also come from Saraswati. So technically, she's not the mother of Ganapati, but in a way she is also. So I don't know anything about Indian classical music. I just know very basic tantric kind of ideas on it. But basically the ragas come directly from her. So they're like divinely, the whole system of knowledge of Vidya comes from her, and then the composition would obviously go to her son, quote unquote. I don't know if that was even interesting, but
No, I think it was, and I get how they could correlate all the systems, right, through the numbers, because for example, on Western music at least, you are going to have 12 semitones, right? Or I think it's like 12 semitones, how they would be called, but they come from a 5 + 7 correlation. So again, that's very tantric, right? As far as I remember you saying, like it's 5 chakras actually, the tantra ones, and then you have the 7. So you can connect those through the numbers, because then again, if you have 12, then you have 12 signs. So in the same way, you could even say, okay, each of the signs will play one of the songs or one of the notes. And then if each of the signs is ruled by a planet, you could say that the sound of the spheres, the music of the spheres that Pythagoras would talk about, is not so crazy after all. Because then if each sign has a specific note and it's ruled by a planet, you could say that that also would be the sound of the planet. So then you can already map that on the tree, right? That's in a way what the archaeometer guys tried to do. The only difference is that they only used 7 notes, so 7 notes and an octave, which is fine as well. It's just another way of playing with the idea, right? So you'll have the 7 and the 8, but you could also try and play with the 12. So that would be interesting, because then you would have each of the, again, 22 letters if you use a 22-letter alphabet.
It's interesting what you just said. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, go on.
Ganapati has 22 forms, so just like the 22 paths. But then what you're saying now, and then even about the numbering that you're like the kind of correlations that you're numbering. So this is something, and like Zan is an astrologer, so I should defer to him on like any astrological thing I say. But the more tantric idea in astrology is exactly what Matt said. Like there are different frameworks, different conceptual sort of astrological mappings, and of course, Jyotisha uses the 9 planetary model, which does and doesn't translate to Indian music. So as far as I understand, so this might be incorrect, but I'm going to try my best. You do have the 7, 8, and but 9 tones, particularly for tantra. So 9 would be like the tantric kind of, I guess the tantric composition number, like for like note arranging. But the 7 or 8, I think 8 particularly important in Carnatic music. But Zan can correct me if I said anything wrong, and I apologize.
No, I don't know much of the details about that stuff. But yeah, it's interesting just that you pull in, these related studies, and it brings to mind, I just want to just invoke another kind of word that is used like kind of in the Greek world and stuff, which is the quadrivium. And it's part of the liberal arts and the classical liberal arts with the trivium. And my understanding, it's like the study of number through these different dimensions, right? These arithmetic, geometry, harmony, or music, and cosmology, which for me, I know it's not really how they studied it in particular, but I just use that as kind of a window of like seeing that we are kind of studying the same substance across these different measuring points of view. And and the tuning system that you use for music or for cosmology, it has such a, it's like one of the things about music. It seems like it sets the tone, for whatever it's encompassing. It's kind of the root, and I think of Ganapati too. I don't know if it's like kind of just a pop, spirituality thing, but I see that he's like associated with like the root, not the root chakra, and like kind of just that fundamental property that music has. That
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, you're hitting on it, Zan. He's the king of the ground. So yeah, he's rooted in the earth by nature, and partly because he has an Asuric nature. So this is obviously a more Buddhist view. This is not really a quote unquote Hindu or Santana Dharma view at all. But in a Buddhist view, he's considered to be a very dualistic deity, very similar to Rahu and Ketu, actually. Very similar, which is also why he has a relationship with them. But I think you're onto it, Zan, and I'm going to let Matt say his tagline. But it really is all interrelated. It really is all the K word at the end of the day. Okay, Matt, please go ahead.
Exactly, it is Kabbalah, always everywhere. I cannot unsee it now, and I find it very interesting because Jen mentioned the quadrivium and the trivium, right? Which you can say it's even the quaternary, so the lower quaternary and the trinity. So again, you have the 7, right? If you sum up both. And what is very interesting is that music, so you have many ways to, after you make music, right, that you compose and so on, you have many ways of using it, let's say. So you have, but even then it's an interesting question in and of itself. Like, what is music? Is it music just because of the intention of making it music? Or if I go out in the forest and then I hear some grasshoppers or the birds chirping, like, would that be music as well? Even if they're not necessarily playing music, right? They're maybe calling each other or whatever. But for us, it could be. So I think that's an interesting thing to think. But my point was, after you have music, you can combine that with other arts that then would make this even more interesting. So for example, you could combine the music that you're doing with movement and with form, color, and so on. And then eventually you have something like a movie. So a movie is composed mainly, right, of, not mainly, sorry, a movie, so cinema, is composed of other arts. It's like a sum of all the other arts and then the synthesis that you do on top of those. So in the same way, you could have music that you only play and you keep listening to the recording, or you could have live music, which is a completely different game, because now you not only have the actual written music that you have to play, but then you have all the performance, like what exactly are you going to wear, or how you're going to deal with the crowd and all these kind of things. So again, this is going to be part of the musical magical operation that you're doing, right? It's not only then about playing the music, but also all the other things that encompasses it. And then even, let's say, I used the movie example, but we can use other types of media, like normal television, or in a spiritual like setting, like if you're using music to try and reach different levels. And that doesn't always have to be necessarily like, for example, as we just gave a lot of examples using the more Eastern side, but even on Christian or Catholic or whatever places, sometimes they will have some kind of music playing as well, because again, it helps set, like Zan beautifully said, it helps set the tone. So music, it's a very easy way for you to reach an emotion, I would say. So if you want to, process some things, let's say you got your heart broken or whatever, you can find specific types of music that would help you process that, bring that emotion up again, so you can release it, right? Because usually as humans, it's not sometimes straightforward to do this. We just keep it to yourselves, and then it kind of sticks to the body, and then we are now holding this with us everywhere. But with music, you have this kind of catharsis, because again, the frequencies and the lyrics and all the setting of the thing, depending on how you're listening to it, will help you achieve different states, which to me, it's super beautiful. Like I'm definitely a music enjoyer. I would love eventually to even be able to compose or do something. Maybe I'll get there one day. But to me, enjoying music, it's a very interesting phenomenon because of this. It's like this whole operation that happens within oneself.
Well, this might be interesting for both you and Zan, rather than like my tantric wisdom wanderings, we'll call them, but which may also be interesting in some ways. But I digress. So the singer of Pink Floyd, the original singer, he had synesthesia. So I did a whole series on this with Nick on Rejects, and so he had synesthesia. And later in his life, when he was out of the band, he actually became like a painter. So I think it kind of goes along with what Matt's saying. He translated seeing the colors of music, like the actual physical colors. And I'm, again, not a music person, but I do understand this, not just through what Matt was saying, but even maybe at the more inner layer. I do use magic to set, or not magic, I do use music to set the stage for like consciousness. So whether that's like Tibetan chanting or specific deity chanting, or for our series, Matt, that we've been doing, I obviously made I call it Aether Gaze, but it's really a heavy shoegaze kind of play mix. But I've actually made them for all of the series. I just didn't share them because I didn't want to be judged for my lack of coolness. But I do consider it to be, there are certain sounds that I associate personally with like the pink color, which I'm very fond of, obviously. So for me, there's a so it's the drone guitar that for me is pink, and then also like in breakcore when they do kind of the decoherent sound, but not, it has to have a melodic quality as well. It's not just noise. There's something more.
Yeah, I guess just that, yeah, like we can all kind of, it's like music is such a universal thing in that sense, where it's used by so many people to, yeah, set, like you said, set the stage for consciousness. And I hearken back to one of our earlier conversations, or our only other earlier conversation, when we were talking about the Métis people and one of the origin stories of the Voyagers, and song and music and singing was really a core part of their culture. And music has this, it has the potential for this kind of generative, like energetic, life-giving property, where they were able to do these really tough feats of labor, and that's common across so many, like that we see that in kind of where the blues came from, and we see that just and like Matt was saying, of just the potential for this emotional alchemical potential that music has to kind of work these emotional scenarios out in this complete container that's somehow also separate from your actual life, and integrate with that. And but yeah, just the Voyagers, they would use these, and they would also use music to set the stage. They would measure their days by the number of songs they sang, and they would have different tempos of songs for the different levels of canoes, because they were sailing these canoes in like northern Canada. And so yeah, music and this tempo setting property, and it's just, that's everywhere. I mean, that's in stores, and that's yeah, just to echo that. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, Zen, simply because Hudson Bay Corporation ended this year. So it's kind of like a signifier for Métis people, for sure. Of course, you bring up the fiddling. I was thinking, as you said it, like, what would Louis Riel say about like our discussion right now? And I think he would. I'm going to say he agrees with me. And Matt doesn't know who any of these people are. Okay, Zen. So just let me riff for a second. But I think he would say that every good kino needs a equally or greater soundtrack. So that's what music is for me. It's like I'm a typical hipster, aging hipster millennial, and so I think that every moment that is kino should have a soundtrack.
That's it.
One thing that is very interesting that both of you bring up, and I'm going to get to all the points. So first of all, Jin was talking about Sid Barrett, right? I think it was the Sid Barrett.
Yeah, Sid Barrett. Yeah.
From
I couldn't remember his name either, so thank you, Matt.
Yeah, all good. So the synesthesia part, right? So it is interesting that, again, it's almost as if there is an originating energy which gets transformed. So whenever this energy, or you can say, let's call it energy, it gets transformed through the spheres, it still is from the same place. So it still comes from the same place. So you can kind of map out how they relate to each other, right? So if someone, again, to my understanding, sound itself, so the frequency of sound is very bina, so very at the top. And before it, you can say light is chokhmah. So you have light and sound. And before it, you have the actual, let's call it formless energy, right? So in Kether. And so to me, that makes sense. Then why would all of these different ways of expressing ourselves correlate to each other? So you mentioned he had synesthesia, right? As even you can say that some smells have a certain sound to it, or certain colors have a certain taste to it, and so on and so on. And another very interesting thing that Zen brought in was the blues, like blues type of music, which reminded me. So I had just talked about this in the beginning of the episode here, which I talked about the tritone, right? So this kind of discordant sound. And this was actually one of the things that I won't say necessarily blues used, but I remembered because of it. So I won't necessarily associate them, but I remembered that at some point, there was this kind of thing called diabolus in musica, so kind of devil in the music, which was this relation, right? This tritone. Because imagine this: you are, let's say, the church, and you need ways to keep people in the frequency that you need them to be, right? For whatever reason you want. I'm not saying it's good or bad, just saying you need people there in this frequency. And this diabolus in musica was the devil, because it would put people in a kind of discordian, or make people wonder, okay, what if maybe what this guy is talking about in front of me is not actually this? Or again, would make them feel different types of emotions that, for example, the church, so the one who named this, right, the diabolus in musica, wouldn't necessarily want to deal with that. So I think that's very interesting, because then eventually you have certain types of music, so genres of music, which are discordian by itself with the current frame of mind that everyone has at the moment, right? Because it could be that, again, if then everyone starts to use tritones and then it becomes the norm, then discordian music would be actually coming back to not using it, right? or like using different types of music. And to tie that, I want to say something, which is, I made kind of like a rhetorical question, which is, okay, what is music then? I mean rhetorical because I have one answer, at least for myself. So somebody can agree, disagree, doesn't matter. So to me, music needs at least 3 components. So again, we have the numerology of it. So we need harmony, melody, and rhythm. To me, if you don't have one of those, sure, you have sound, but maybe you don't have music, right? So when you have those 3, then you can start building the numerology of it, because then you build the type of, tones that you have. So Western, again, has 8 if you count the octave, and then you have 12 semitones, but you can use other systems as well. That's fine. But if you have those 3, then you have something going on. And like Jin said, if you just have like a discordant sound, but maybe it doesn't have the correct, I think you used the word harmony or melody. Maybe I'm mistaken here, but that's the idea. Like if it has this, then you can appreciate it as music, not only as sound, right? So it's kind of also a perception thing, because you can play around, for example, with different types of sounds and different way that they appear. For example, if you're doing, again, a movie, maybe there's going to be a background sound, but the characters are still talking, or there's still something going on, which is, so then you have layers of the thing, right? And maybe those can be part of the music if you play it right. So they are not necessarily, they weren't necessarily made with the music, but they are there and they can play around in unison. So I think that's a very interesting idea as well.
What would you think, Matt, if I told you that the Mahavijaya goddess, so the tantric tree that I sometimes talk about, that I'm sure that is not well articulated enough to be totally understood, but I think you get it in the color and numerological layer, and maybe the obviously keyword layer. But the goddess who would arise to do musical composition, like tantric musical composition, she actually arises in Tiferet. But I think it goes perfectly with what you said about Binah and Hokmah, because Binah is the constriction of the light, so you can tell what something is, right? So that makes perfect sense to me, that she would arise at Tiferet because she would have those Kali qualities. And then the space thing, that's really interesting, because what goddess can be at Hokmah? Well, you can say Dumavati. Obviously, I've said that in many episode and spaces. I agree with that. But there's actually a goddess higher than her who has the power of the para speech. So that is Varahi, the boar-headed one. So in her speech, that's what captures space. That's how, the only way in Tantra that you can capture space is through a speech or through sound, sometimes through just the word. Sometimes it's the primordial word, or sometimes it's the gross word. It depends. But I just thought that's really interesting, because if you understand how the system works, so it's her gross word, and then it's kind of Kali's time of silence, which obviously we're equating to sort of a constriction of the light, so we can understand sort of what we're seeing color wise, and then also what we're hearing in space. So this goddess, she has 8 arms. And so it aligns with the idea that there is obviously a consort. So it gives the full 10 directions, but he's never depicted, right? It's just her, because that's how that kind of tantra works. I know I'm getting off way on a tangent, but she often holds a sitar. So she directly is the goddess of musical composition. Now, Matt, you brought up birds and bird songs. Well, parrots are her particular bird, and every Mahavijaya has birds associated with them. This is not that well known, but I know it. So parrots are associated with her in particular. So parrots can mimic Vok city. So I agree that the tantric idea is that, yes, the birds, especially crows, they have their own bija even, but that but that birds in general, they have their own language. But what sets it apart is that man's language has maybe more potential, because we can apply things like will to it. right? Like we can apply the different layers of realized speech or gross speech or subtle speech or hyper realized speech, like any of those. We can apply sort of like our will, our desires, maybe not desires, but yeah, people do that. So I think that's really interesting. You brought up some really interesting points, Matt. So thank you so much. Zan, if you want to, I guess I'll run it like a space.
Yeah. Well, just on that topic of Bina, and I'm super new to the Kabbalah, but would Bina be the one? Would that be more related with Jupiter? Is that
Saturn.
Saturn? Okay.
But something Matt said is related to Jupiter. He talked
Okay.
about being in perception. That is
Uh-huh.
very Hesed. That's very Jupiterian.
I said, okay, yeah, and because Jupiter has kind of this astrological connection to it's the significator for the fifth house in Vedic astrology, of which is referred to the house of mantra, and it's kind of like the part of music and that you would say is the space of music, and kind of the yeah, like I think it goes back to those categories and stuff. Um, but I also wanted to just Matt was speaking on the different intervals of music, because I feel like those really, when you get to music, those are really the fundamental categories that you would really want to start with, and that is how um, you know Indian classical music training really starts from the natural tonal origins of music, and kind of Western it's more from like the conceived kind of abstract mental direction, which that comes down to a lot of like tuning systems and this difference of the just intonation of the Eastern music systems and equal temperament of the West, and that's fascinating like thing there. But just yeah, to just speak on that, of that's something that in Steiner's unpacking of the metaphysics of music, he kind of goes through each of the intervals, and how back in the early days where music was used in churches, and kind of as a religious kind of sacred thing only, not so much for entertainment. Only these certain sets of intervals were used, like the unison, which is just 1-to-1, and then the octave, which is double that, and then the perfect fifth and the perfect fourth. And they're called perfect because there's no real, you don't ever get into a dissonant place. And then it wasn't until later that the major and minor third were added, and then you do have the possibility for this tritone and this dissonance to be added that gets resolved into consonance. And so that was before that happened, that wasn't really a part of music, and now it's like a core thing. We have like these minor chord and it resolves into a major chord, and jazz is really like the process of going as far into dissonance and kind of nonsense as you can, and then kind of making it make sense given how it resolves, and this process of resolution. And so I just thought that was just kind of speaking on the blues and jazz, and how this music developed is an interesting
Well, you
conversation.
said a lot of really interesting words, Zan. So resolution, I love that. It's very middle pillar, very Pink Ray. Rectification, sort of rebuilding the foundations, as it were. So the saint can travel through. That's the whole idea. I think that you also said something interesting about how giving context to things that are decoherent. So I think in your example, you were talking, I don't know if you were specifically meaning Saturn, but I'm going to sort of bring it there, is that Saturn would be a great enemy of decoherence because it's bringing things into understanding at the more Kabbalistic
Mhm.
layer, right? So I think you're totally on with what you said. It's like the enemy of decoherence. It's like the total understanding. But there has to also be a decoherence for like context to arise in meaning. I usually would talk about this in more of like a magical or a tantric or a Buddhist or whatever writing sense even. But I think at the musical layer is actually where it makes the most sense. Maybe you could say that's like the secret of the secret layers, but I'm just not musical enough to really understand. But yeah, I mean, in Tantra, music is so important. It is one of the five, or not five, excuse me, 8 sense offerings. I mean, it has the power to be healing or cursing. And I've brought this up many times, so I apologize, Matt, because he's heard this. But there's a really good Chinese animation called Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. So in the animation, he basically plays a zither, like a Chinese sitar equivalent, sort of a Central Asian sort of flat guitar. And so Chinese music uses a different tonal system. I don't know any of it. My parents weren't like that. So anyway, so basically there's a whole sequence or a whole subplot about music of cursing, tantric music. So this is the exact same idea that we would have, is that music would be in synthesis. That's why it's tiferatic or at the sun. But then it's also can be decoherent, but you have to do it in a magical sense subtly. You would have to do it underneath the pleasant sound. So you couldn't, would have to be imperceptible. So I think this also goes along with what you were saying, Zan, is that there is a Jupiterian element. There's a doubling that happens at Jupiter. And so obviously I want to hear what Matt says, but those were some of the, I guess, things that arose for me.
Okay, that's very nice. So what you just mentioned about music being able to curse, let's say, or used as a curse element. So you can see that there's a lot of discourse, right? And I won't say if that's true or not. Everyone can reach their own conclusions. There's many people that would argue that some popular music would have like hidden messages within them, right? If like you play them backwards, or there's like subtle things in the post production or whatever that you cannot hear necessarily when you're listening to the song. You can go as far as that, but you don't also need to go as far as that, because if you have, for example, a song that is going to create in you a specific imagination, specific scenery and emotions and so on, and if those creations are not necessarily aligned with the life that you want to have, let's say in Brazil, it's super common for people to listen to country music, which usually talks about you like getting cheated on or whatever. So again, if you sing your throats out, your lungs out, sorry, upon that, and you feel everything and so on and so on, you are creating that reality to yourself. So in a way, you are cursing yourself, right? It's not someone bringing that into you, but you are doing it yourself. And again, it has like a catchy song, like what Jin said, it has to be catchy or like good in the surface, but people won't realize what exactly he's creating, which again doesn't go, I am not here to gatekeep and say, no, don't listen to this kind of music. Like, do as you will. But if you understand what you're doing, not only can you break the programming if you don't need it, if you don't want it, but also you can play around with it. You can take advantage of that. For example, whenever you're listening to a music, you can actually change its lyrics in your mind if you want to sing it together, and like just change the meaning of the lyrics. Again, you are the one eventually resonating with the thing or not, but you can use like a catchy song, again, a catchy melody, for example, in the rhythm, and then change the output, change the lyrics, right? Or the emotion that you are attaching to it. Because maybe you hear a song that was supposedly to be made to be sad, for example, but you can now actually hijack and change the emotion. Because what exactly would make a sound make you feel certain emotion? Like usually that is very cultural related. So again, and I think that comes to what Zen was talking about, the intervals and how they differ in like the Western world and the East and so on and so on. One thing very nice that I wanted to bring up is the idea of instruments, right? Because we are talking about music as this kind of output. So this thing that, again, you have the theoretical things, the creations and the notes and intervals and so on and so on. But then it comes to a way where eventually you want to express it. And you can do this by singing. You can do this by, again, using a specific instrument and so on. And before we go into the discourse, I just wanted to share a story which happened, I think like a week ago or something, which was very interesting. So I had a dream that I was being like a luthier, so the guy who fixes guitars and so on, violins. And for some reason, I had this thing, which at the moment I could only relate to a crossbow. So it's like a weapon, it's not even an instrument, but it was what my mind could relate to. And it had some, like a piano, it had like things that I could press, and it had strings. And it also had something very interesting, which was like an engine or like a circle on it. And I was kind of like messing around and fixing it and so on. I woke up, I was like, okay, that's crazy. Maybe I'll do a sketch or something, or like search if that even exists, because I had no reference at all. So I went to ChatGPT and asked it, like I gave the descriptions, the way that I was able to understand it. And it said to me some examples. One of them was an instrument called hurdy-gurdy. It's literally what I had dreamed of. It's like basically the same thing. You have this thing where you basically, like, again, like I'm saying it's an engine, but it's like a circle that you have to keep moving. So the circle interacting with the strings is making a sound, and then you press on some keys to make then different notes. So again, it's a crazy instrument, and to me it was very nice. And what I wanted to then correlate is this idea that different instruments will let you express different spheres, and therefore different planets, signs, and so on and so on. So for example, instruments that you use, that you can try and associate with elements, you could say, for example, that drums are very earth related. For example, you could say that flute and kind of like string instruments are very air related, and so on and so forth. So you can play around with those ideas. And you could also understand it from, if you use your fingers to play it, depending on which of the fingers you use, again, each of them is going to be connected to a sphere, right? I'm not going to say necessarily the associations here, because you can find it yourself. But the idea is that, for example, if you have your index finger on the left hand, that would be that could be related to Gevura, for example. So if you use that in the instrument, you can say, okay, you have to be skilled in Gevura in a way for you to use this instrument, because otherwise your finger won't correspond, or won't like respond correctly, and so on, and you make mistakes. So again, I think it would be nice. I don't know if you guys thought about this or like saw something like this before. This idea of connecting the instruments to some kind of element, or to some idea in general, right? It doesn't have to be an element. I just use the elements because then you can correlate to, for example, drums being more something that grounds you. So if you are in, let's say, a shamanic ritual, then the drums are going to help you like stay here and not, fly away. But a flute might help you, like you see the guy singing the flute for snakes, for example, and the snake going up. To me, that's again very clearly showing the Kundalini raising. I cannot see it differently. So again, it's making the energy go up. So it's actually the opposite, right? You can play around with this, like making the energy go down, up, and so on. And then it goes to show how different styles of music, by using different instruments, can show up different emotions. For example, you may not think that a violin is playable, let's say, in a metal band, but I know some metal bands that use this, and then it creates a nice contrast from the harsh and like dark sound with the light violin, for example. So you can play around with those, and I think it's very interesting.
Well, Matt, we're old. I mean, I don't know how old Zan is, but I'm old. And so we actually, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was actually a lot of alternative bands that did use the violin, and the chorus obviously made it cool as well. I was never a chorus enjoyer, but definitely there was a lot of cool, like alternative, what we would call alternative rock music that did incorporate it. So I'm kind of showing my age a little bit. That's okay. I think it's really interesting, though, what you said about the instruments and the elements. I'm sure Zan will have like a correlation, but for me, I've heard other people talk about this. Maybe you're doing it much more like modern magic, and I obviously that's also my perspective, so I appreciate that. But I think in the more grimoire look at it, or maybe in the more like esoteric Christian perspective, they would have said that like each choir of angels, so each like level of the hierarchy would have a certain instrument. But then I've also read that angels can only play wood, like air instruments, like flutes and and all those like piccolos and harps and that kind of stuff. Like like it's kind of like it's the opposite of like the reverberation of yesod. So it's kind of like opposed to drums rather than it's kind of lacking that material vibratory element. I don't know if that made sense, but yeah, but I agree that you can map the instruments absolutely to the elements and to the sephira. And I think that you made a great, like I always say, like Yesod is where the vibes live. So for me, that is like where sort of the beat happens, like like that sort of reverberation, not necessarily what you hear, but what you sort of feel with your feet, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. This is something that also came up in that Rudolf Steiner lecture of especially talking about the piano, which is um, like for all instruments, they all seem to be in some way a replication of something that we're already doing with our body and with our voice, and like the guitar being this hollow body where the sound reverberates around, and these strings kind of mimicking our vocal folds. Like all string instruments are kind of like our vocal folds, and then we're turning our body into this resonant chamber. So it's just an interesting thing to see that, yeah, instruments are really like mapping out to these different parts of our body. But for the piano is an interesting instrument because it's there's this layer of abstraction, right? And there's this there's where we're removed, and that's kind of the thing with Western music in general, is like it's very much derived from the construct of the piano and this kind of like mental this mental kind of experience of music, and that's how, you know, great composers are able to create these very complex things, and how we have jazz that's very it's very portable and adaptable, kind of like the English language itself. And it's kind of this thing of like portability and adaptability at the expense of this tonal purity that you have in kind of religious music in India and in China and places. So just to bring that in, and yeah, just an interesting like quote from Steiner on that was that man must get away from the impressions of the piano if he wishes to experience the actual musical element. And so, and it's like I remember reading that because that's my kind of my main instrument, piano and organ, and kind of, you know, being like kind of puzzled and kind of maybe offended by that because like, but then reflecting on it, and it's true. It's like, and especially for an electric instruments, like that layer of abstraction between the actual physical tonal vibrations and the sound itself, it just grows and grows with what we can do electronically. And so yeah, that's just some stuff on, yeah, just the range of yeah, tone. Yeah.
No, I loved what you said, Zan. I think it's really important. Actually have a question. I'm sure everyone's surprised. So, Zan, what do you think the sort of music of the universe is? Like, if you could pick an instrument and say, or a sound, or a song, or even an idea or color, or maybe we say it's like it's Bill and Ted, it's like a chord, or we say it's like Star Trek and it's the whale song. Like what is a song that restores the universe? And Matt, obviously you can too.
I guess I don't know if it's a song, but what just came to mind is the Overtone series itself. And so that sequence of the overtone, like the way that a tone, like as I'm speaking now, like as we're all speaking, like we hear one melodic pitch that's traveling around, and I'm more monotone sometimes, so it kind of stays at one pitch, but underneath that all, and you can like break it down in viewing all the sound waves, there's all these overtones that unfold from that, and they map out to the vowels, and they have all these implications. But So I would say, I mean, and it kind of sounds like a song. You can go and look it up and like, what does the overtone series sound like? And it's just, it's the unison, the octave, and then a fifth, and then it kind of unfolds from there. But from that one sequence is how all of music evolved and was created. So I would say the overtone series. Yeah.
Awesome. Matt, what do
Yeah.
you think? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I think the first thing that came to mind was the sound of right? The primordial sound, I think. I don't know. It's like, to me, this idea of having kind of like a white noise behind everything, that from which everything then would be generated, it makes sense, right? Because then it's not necessarily about the sound itself. Is, again, this idea of having a formless energy that becomes like the idea is that the formless energy is super fast, so it slows down a little bit, becomes a little bit more crystallized, so then it becomes light, then becomes a little bit more crystallized, becomes sound, so on and so forth, right? The lightning path. And I would say, like, without thinking that much about it, the sound would be a good fit for it. Definitely.
I like both of your answers. I'm not giving one because I don't really have one.
Come on.
But okay, so I will say something interesting, Matt, about yours, and it's not because I don't think Zan's was great. I do. I just have to go listen to the Overton series, and then I'll have to come back. Well, Zan will have to come back, obviously, and we'll have to discuss it again. I agree with Matt in the sense that, like, the is the primordial sound. Now, would you acknowledge it or not? Well, I would say from Buddhist perspective, it doesn't arise from God, quote unquote, but maybe it's like the ineffable sound of the mind. But then we also have other bijas that maybe are even of higher importance, like home or stream or yeah, those are the two that are and obviously, which is the throat bija, which is red and green. So that even goes back to something that Matt was even saying at the very beginning, because there's a red and a green quality, just like there would be at Netzach. Like how Mars loves Venus so much that he kind of pours his energy into her a little. So it's like the fire. And then she's also like a martial or battlefield goddess. So there's like an element of interchange there where she's like both. She's like a battle maiden, but then she's also like the queen of the garden or the queen of the fortress or the queen of eternity, whatever. But that's kind of the idea, is like a Durga, like she can interchange between Mars and Venus. So I think that even correlates to the red and the green, and it's very interesting for me to hear about like the color layer, since that is how I relate to the Sephirotic densities the most, other than conceptual like word or idea.
Right. I think the first time that I heard about this like idea, or at least that I remember from like reading this stuff, dropping the and also maybe something for later, but I think recently I understood that there's a difference also between and aum. So like the OM and AUM, if you know what I mean. And I don't know, you probably know the difference, but I just realized that they are not exactly the same thing, or it doesn't seem like it. But before you go into that, something that I wanted to bring up. So I could be wrong, but I think Zen, you teach some music as well. At least I remember reading that or something like that from your Twitter. But I would like to like understand from you if you have a certain preference from, like, I guess you also like to enjoy music, obviously, but like how exactly. For example, I can start so you get the idea of what I'm talking about. So I'm very fond of live performances. I'll tell why in a second, but not that I don't like listening to music like at home or recorded or so on. It's just that live music to me adds more layers to the thing, because first of all, you are seeing the thing in synthesis. So it's you and the person playing, right? It's not only you and the recording. It's you, it's the person playing. It's the energy of the crowd and the energy of the band, if it's a band, or just one person, if just one person. It's the light show that also happens, which again adds a totally different layer to it. And it's, as a Kabbalist, it's super funny to see like seeing the music and seeing the colors that they are using. So it's very clear that the light engineers know what they're doing, kabbalistically, at least to a degree. Maybe, obviously better bands will have better light engineers, but it's very nice to see how they play with that. So you have then the synthesis of the thing, the performance. You have the lights, you have the gestures. So again, it's a very ritualistic thing, especially if you go to a type of niche, let's say. So if you go to metal, you're going to have certain gestures and things that you're going to do, or certain even actions, like you have like circle of thefts and wall of thefts and this kind of thing. But if you go to other types of genres, then you may have other types of rituals and gestures and so on. So again, when you have all of this in synthesis and on time, because again, you are there, you have to enjoy the moment. It's different than, sure, I can enjoy music at home. Like I don't have to listen to it while doing something else. I can just listen to music. But it's nice to have a moment in space to go and do this. So that's to me why live music is so nice. And I had yesterday a very interesting experience, which added one more layer to it, which there was this the compositor from Naruto's OST, so Takanashi, and like Naruto's, Fairy Tail, some other animes, and he was actually performing here in Italy, and I had the chance to go and see him live. So he's the compositor. He also plays the piano, the kind of piano that he holds with him. And there was like other guys. So there was some Finnish guys from metal bands. There was some other Japanese musicians and so on. So they were all playing together. They have like I think it's a group. It's Far East Groove or something like this. And to me, that was especially interesting because, again, it added a new layer of the story behind the thing. So kind of like a meta data of the concert. Because if you are playing an OST from an anime, I'm not only having the emotion from the music, which, okay, it's cool. Obviously, it's like super epic. But I can also drain the emotion from the time that I spent putting emotion into the anime. So like when I was watching it or consuming it and thinking about it or whatever. So to me, that exploded in my mind. I was like, okay, that is like amazing, because then I can try to emulate that whenever I'm going to other types of concerts. Now I understood that, okay, now this is a possibility. Actually, whenever I go to a concert, I can try and see if there are ways to, again, add more layers to the thing, because again, you never know. Nowadays I'm an enjoyer, but who knows, maybe one day I'll actually have some fingers in working with these things. To me, would be a dream, would be super nice. Just being part of like even if just once or whatever, like actually composing or like being part of a live performance, whatever. But I think, again, to me, that's why live is so interesting, as opposed to just listening to the recording somewhere, which is also cool, but maybe not that cool. I don't know. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, no, I do enjoy live music. I don't kind of live in a rural area, so I don't really get a lot of good live music around here. But yeah, I would say my experience with the enjoyment of music is usually, I find it extremely gratifying to actually be a part in the creation of it in some way. So I like to sing in choirs. I've just a little bit participated in singing in musicals and playing for some churches and in these kind of ways that and also that brings back to the Portuguese thing, which is I really developed a passion for the voice in ayahuasca ceremonies and in singing these Brazilian medicine songs that really kind of opened up my voice to an extent. And so, yeah, that I really find so much joy in playing music and reading music. And that's mostly what I teach is kind of the basics of piano and this skill of reading music and actually participating in those things that feel so juicy to listen to. It's like even that much more to actually be involved in the creation of those. And I think that's something that anyone can really tap into the basics of. And but yeah, I don't. I guess I don't listen to music. I do. I go through phases of different bands that I would be really into, and I'll be listening to that a lot. But it kind of comes in waves between that and playing and learning. And but yeah, no, I love it all. Yeah.
So there's something very interesting that you mentioned about the medicine songs, so the ayahuasca ones, which I agree. Some of them are just so beautiful, and then I cannot really tell eventually if it's that they are that beautiful already, or if because I was in the ceremony and then it amplified how beautiful it was. But at least
Right,
in my
for
head,
sure.
when I remember, it was such a beautiful thing, and it is an interesting point of view, because if you have your senses heightened from whatever way, right? If you were just meditating by yourself or whatever, not advising you to do anything here, but you can see really how music affects us. And it becomes very clear, because I remember, for example, being in certain rituals that, let's say, even if I was just by myself or whatever, if I was with other people, sometimes certain music would come, and it's like, when it comes, you gotta deal with it, like maybe it's like some catharsis you need to go through and whatever, and it's literally the music changes, you start going through it, it's almost instantaneous. And in the same way, you can see a little bit of how the synesthesia people like perceive music, because again, it kind of starts hitting you in many different ways. I remember the last time I did this, something like this was, I think, December last year. So this was December 24. And at some point, one of the songs had me like almost starting to go downhill. But then I understood, wait a second. I am, again, in control of the thing, in the sense of I can at least, or rather, not that I'm in control, but I was trying to control the thing, which wasn't the point at the time. Was like, okay, let yourself go, let the music place you there and here and so on, so on. And when I did this, then the thing was extremely, extremely nice, in the sense that you can make such connections. Like, again, I mentioned live music, and I now, like, countless times I'm in a concert, I'm not thinking about anything in particular, I'm just enjoying the music, but then connections will come, for projects I'm being part of, or for things that I'm working on myself, and so on. And then sometimes even the lyrics play at the quote unquote correct time for the thing that I'm working on my mind. So I think those are then especially beautiful for these kind of things, those type of musics.
I think that was really beautiful, Matt. I'm sure you don't want to hear my voice, but I'll just say that. I know I thought it was great. And Zan, you do have a really amazing podcast voice. Let me just say, as someone who hates the sound of their own voice, I wish I was more monotone, and maybe that is my, clip to work on or whatever. But is to be a little less electric all over the place. But no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, we all want what we don't have, I guess.
Well, I'll say this about a live performance, Matt, even though you didn't ask me particularly, but I'm like Zan, like I live in a rural place. There are options, but it's not really my kind of music. However, I will say that like I being from a big city, I lived that was mostly my life, right? So I've been to pretty much like all the concerts I'm not saying there's no one I would want to see, but I've been to everything that I want to see. So for me, music, I think of music as like strictly internal, strictly personal. But I do play music in the house because I do like the sound of chanting, and I also like I play it for the plants, and I play it for like the animals and like my animals, but also any wildlife that is around. And I think it for also for me, for my consciousness, like being in perception of what the sound is. And but I also think that it is important to be quiet, and I think that's maybe is that what Zan is better at than me, is that he's more able to sit and be quiet, whereas I probably struggle with that a little outside of sadhana.
Yeah, I get this as well. Sometimes I see that I know the symptom is when I'm not able to not have a song in my head. Like even if I'm not listening to something, my mind is kind of rehearsing through the songs. Then I know, okay, I'll stop a little bit because okay, maybe it's too much. But in a way, what I also started trying to do when back when I started learning Kabbalah and practicing and so on, is actually trying to have a musical life, let's say. So imagine like when you are trying to talk and you think about ways of rhyming or intoning your voice in such a way that again it sounds kind of musical. I think that's very nice. Like for example, Italians do this without wanting, even it's just the way they speak. I'd say sometimes Brazilian Portuguese does it as well. I think Italians do it more. And there's just some people, or I guess will do it more often. Obviously, I'm generalizing here, but it's an interesting thing because again, it makes it almost as if your sound, your voice, sorry, becomes kind of this hypnotic thing, not necessarily even for others, but for yourself as well. So you are then you can more easily enter some trance state if you want, right? Obviously, you don't need it to do it that often, but if you want it, then it's something that can easily bring you up there. So again, very different techniques, but I think it's something that I've also been trying to balance out, like the amount of time that I spend listening just passively and then actually trying to use it. Like again, I mentioned I'm still not able to super play an instrument. I'm trying to pick up the guitar and just play around, but at least the musical component, so trying to create some melody or rhythm, or even try to more actively listen to music. So for example, try to differentiate what I'm listening. So the instruments, maybe I'll try to focus just on the drums and then just on the bass and see if I can pick up the differences. Because it's funny, when I have songs that I listen to for, I don't know, months and months and months and years, I have parts of the songs more, and usually it's like the leading, so vocals or guitars, right, for the types of music that I listen to, and those are the ones that stick. But then I go and listen again, and maybe I start to see, oh, there's this like bass sound that I never even perceived, and it was always here. I listened to music, but I never perceived. So I think that's a very interesting exercise as well, because then you can start to pick up the sounds again whenever you are meditating or whenever you are in nature, just paying attention. You can see how much of a melody is going out that sometimes we don't even pick up. We just close ourselves. So I think it helps a lot with perception.
Yeah, and just to say that listening, even when you're playing music, it's like everyone will say that really the main skill that you're developing is your ability to hear and listen. And so yeah, just that receiving, that silence is such a big part of it all. And yeah, just to tag a little bit just on that, living a musical life is something that I've thought about, and how this is connected to stuff like our voice. And I read this book that was like the Eastern, it was like the Taoist, it was connecting Taoism and vocal training essentially. And that's what I've found, and it's in so much of like the Italian bel canto texts. If you read them, they really sound like a Neigong, like Taoist text, because it's about developing your dantian and like learning how to intelligently pull from that without doing too much and acting too much. And that training, for anyone that's trained in like Taoism or even yoga or Qigong or any of those things, that really, that ability to live more harmoniously within your body is like that's all day. That's you take that with you kind of in whatever posture or in whatever action that you're doing. So yeah.
I love that, Zan. And you brought it back to Jupiter, maybe, I don't know, subconsciously, maybe consciously. Because one of the qualities you talked about, this kind of like the hearing, that's obviously associated with green Tara. That's obviously the Buddhist version, not the more tantric Hindu version, but the Buddhist version, she is the hearer. So I always, Matt's heard me say this a million times, but like the blue green of Hesed, blue green Tara, it all makes sense to me. She's the, mother of infinite mercy. And she is the, guardian of or the queen of the supernal waters. So the milk ocean, as you could say. So in a way, she is sort of the formations, you could say, of the world, because we have to be in perception of it and to it to be in relationship with it. So I know one of the things that you're interested in is like the geo-ontological relations of, like you mentioned, the Métis people. And obviously they did the fiddling, but they also had like indigenous elements. And in especially the dancing, the Métis jigging. So they would actually picked up like a Cree thing where they would do the ground touch. So if you've ever been to a powwow, you'll see the plains dancers. This is strictly more of a plains thing. I have no idea about the other people, but they'll touch the ground like a sort of like acknowledgement of like the mother. And they'll say like the whatever, like some of the boys will say like the eagles guide my feet, or the whatever, the spirit of whatever guides my feet. But it's really, they're just using it as like a more maybe metaphorical thing. And so they picked it up. So if you watch Métis jigging, they actually have Cree elements. So it's interesting also because this is a dialogue in synthesis, but also because music has to happen in synthesis, and of course also has to happen in perception. So I agree with what both of you are saying, that music should illuminate the world as it is, but then there's also a layer of music that it can create the world as you will it. So I think as a group of magicians, maybe that's an interesting way to think of it.
Right. It's kind of like the abracadabra, right? You have through the word, the word, the ability to create things, which then it's like you can see this, right? A lot of the old magical things were just rhymes, and then if you wanted to break the magic, you would just break the rhyme. So again, that's a very musical thing. Or even all the stories, right? All the books and scriptures and so on and so forth, the texts, where basically you don't just read them. So it's not just hard, you just don't read them, but you sing them sometimes, right? You chant them and so on. So you get very, very much related.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting what you just said, Matt. And you guys had a whole dialogue about ayahuasca ceremony, and I was like thinking to myself, this kind of sounds like Sundance. Like it's a little bit like it. They don't do drugs or anything, but so that primarily it's through fasting, but like the song is considered to be the most important, and like you don't get to really sing it. Like you might know a song, or someone might have given you a song, but you're kind of in an altered state through fasting, which I know is also part of like a vegetal or ayahuasca diet anyway. For people who go to Sundance, usually they eat nothing, pretty much. You just like subsist on the lowest amounts of water that you need. So I mean, you're there and you can't smoke, you can't drink. No tobacco, nothing. So it's in a one way I understand, even though I've never done an ayahuasca ceremony, I can understand that it kind of takes you into like a visionary, like you need the foundation to prepare you for like crossing that threshold, or crossing that gateway. And I'm not making a pun. I'm just making a metaphysical observation that you have to sort of have the base solid. So maybe that is where Zan is strong, Matt, and you should take notes from him, is that like to play the instrument is, and I know that's your aspiration, is to play it is like the foundation, maybe. And then to be able to play with it is, I think, what you'll really get into. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, indeed. When you do, I can't say for Zen, the experiences that he had, but at least the ones that I got to know, I've been to like some, not always the same place back in Brazil, but yes, you have this component of preparing yourself. So obviously, maybe different places will do different preparations, but usually it's composed of abstaining yourself from certain things. So that could be, again, alcohol, smoking, sex, like just, again, even certain types of food. Maybe you won't eat meat for a week or so, like even more, or like fatty things and so on and so forth, because that helps, again, prepare the environment, right? But most importantly, you should prepare the mind. So the mind foundation should be the strongest, because it's, again, you are, like you said, and I agree, you're crossing a threshold. So you are kind of like opening, you're lifting the veil, which you will see then whatever's in there. So it's not like you're gonna see or hear or sense or whatever something crazy. It's gonna depend on your head, on your state of mind. So that's why, to be honest, I don't even suggest that people do such things, just because, again, it's such a responsibility. And if you to me, it has to be magical. Like, if the thing just happens to happen, perfect, embrace it, but don't seek it, if you get what I mean. Don't go after it. I think that's a wrong way to approach it. Or even worse, don't expect something out of it, because you might get surprised. I can say that. I don't know if Zen wants to talk a little bit about it.
No, that's definitely my experience too. It's like it has to be this calling towards it, or and not to expect it to be any kind of way. But just one thought that I've had around that is that there's this whole in an ayahuasca ceremony, there's this whole process where some people might like be purging, right? That's like this kind of this hallmark thing of it. And what I've heard from my teachers is like, I mean, really the way around that, not that that's a bad thing if that happens during a ceremony, but really the if you want to transmute that, really you need to be singing and dancing and kind of like there, and that was an interesting thing to hear. Just thinking in the system of the chakras, and the Vishuddha being this throat chakra, and this being referred to as the purifier, and that's it has that purification process of like the voice and activating that. And that's just been a core part of my experience in that, is that it's like either you're gonna this energy is gonna move through you, and unless you kind of meet it where it's at, and kind of ride it in that sense, by expression, and by kind of doing things intelligently, it's going to come out in other ways, is kind of how I've experienced those ceremonies. And it just has, and just to go back also to what you guys were saying just about giving you the awareness of how light is sound in those moments too. Just you really get to have that experience of seeing the architecture of the music that you'd normally just be receiving and hearing. And so
I completely agree. And there was something interesting that the last time that I went to one, I had the honor of going with my Kabbalah mentor. It was a great experience, and he told me something that, well, it made sense to me at the time. Maybe you don't need to generalize for all all the things that happen in this way, but imagine that you are basically making an invitation to something within you, right? It can be ayahuasca, and it can be even other things like mushrooms, whatever. And whenever you're doing it, you can create an archetype for it, which, again, it's not something literal, but you can imagine, you can give an image, let's say, to ayahuasca. It can be like a woman or a guy, it doesn't matter. So you're giving it an anchor, a point of reference. And you just basically sit yourself, sit down, in the sense mentally sit down, and let it go, let it lead you through the roller coaster. So the problem is, some people will do this, and then the roller coaster will go up, and they'll like in the middle of it be, no, I want out now. And well, it's inside of you right now. So the only way out is through holes you have. So that might be, any way of purging. Sometimes it's just tears, sometimes whatever. So it to me, then it made a lot of sense, because when I look back at the few times actually that I had something like this, which wasn't necessarily a blessing, or not blessing, sorry, it wasn't necessarily the best thing to go through. And I think that's also a good way for the thing to regulate itself, because you remember that that's not something to be playing around with. Like, you need the intent to, again, there must be like a calling or something. But I realized that the times that everything went perfect was because, yeah, I was leading with, like you said, it could be by dancing or by playing an instrument or by singing or by, just perceiving things, not trying to control the experience. Because, again, and eventually you should realize that if you're going to such places, that the thing that you are activating, let's say, you can do it at home by yourself. You don't need any other like chemical components, whatever. So you can ritualize your life. You can access the same levels of, let's say, lifting the veil by just meditating and breath work and so on and so forth. You don't need necessarily external things. Again, that would be a klifa. If you only need external things to do it, it's not a good sign. So eventually you should realize that. And sure, if you want to go here and there for the sake of the experience, because you have other people there, so the thing happens in synthesis and so on, that's cool. But the whole experience, I would say, and then again, connecting with the music, even, the whole experience, you should be able to recreate to yourself, and then you can control it. But if you're asking for this other forces, let's say, to guide you, then yeah, let them do their work, and I guess in the same way, it's, to me, that's the, I guess, skill you need to enjoy music. It's like not trying to, control where the music is leading you, but just, being able to close your eyes and see what the music is showing you. And it's not going to show the same thing for everyone, but that's such a good exercise. I think when I can know when I'm in like flow mode, let's call it this way, when I'm, let's say, doing some work or whatever, listening to music, and if I just stop and focus on the music, I can just not only feel it going through my whole body, but I can see some kind of like film that is related to the thing that I'm listening to. And I think that's, again, maybe an interesting skill to start to develop, because then you can realize, wait a second, okay, I'm doing this to music, but I can just do this in other ways. Again, that, to me, that's how, for example, clarividence works. How can you see things with your mind? It's like with this kind of similar sense. You're translating the thing with different inputs. I think that's how you can make such magical songs. Even I think that would help a lot.
I think that you're hitting it, Matt. It's like it's single pointedness. It's like meditation number one, breath work number one. Like that's how to hit it. Like you want my secret? That's my secret. It's meditation. Meditation number one. Like if you're not hitting the sadhana, just forget it. That's how I think of it anyway. But I am a tantra Buddhist, so we definitely have our like a specific way that we think about like how you engage with religion or how you engage with spirituality. It has to be through like a very foundational but also rigorous practice. And I found that I do so much better when I'm really hitting sadhana. Like if I'm really doing it, I'm like I feel great. I feel like everything that I do in my offline life is great, and I feel like everything that I do, obviously when Matt you join me and when I do the show, I feel like it's just so smooth, much smoother anyway. And when I'm a little more off my sadhana game, I'm a little more decoherent too. And so that's, I think, a good time to be quiet, like Zan was saying, is like there's a moment to be a hearer, a moment to be a listener. And that is really what teaches us bodhicitta. Like you want to know the secret of that? It's like it's the sound across the ocean, the lightning across the ocean, and it's like reverberation. But think of that as just being like mercy or love or however you want to describe it, loving kindness, and then we have to like sort of perceive ourselves that we perceive ourselves being a vessel worthy of that. Because whether we think it comes from God or whether we think it comes from the Buddhas or whether we think it comes from other people or even ourselves, like we have to be a worthy vessel to receive that. So that's part of the hearing. That's also, as you said, Matt, and as I said, and as Zan made other analogies, that is part of the That's like what green tar is. It's like to recognize yourself in perception. I don't know. I kind of think that the lesson is always bodhicitta. I think that music expresses it extremely well. I think that it also goes along with what you said, Matt, about how music can be used as like magical operations for perhaps negative qualities. But there is also something interesting about fame, and that's one of the cities that the goddess that I mentioned at the very beginning, who is a form of Tara. So again, relating to Hesed, but she's a little different. She's wrathful. She's much more wrathful, and she's much more she grants fame in a fleeting way can be. So it's kind of like the life of a star almost, like the life of like a Western, we'll say Western for this instance, a Western pop star. It's like how they fade in and out. That is kind of her boon. It's not everlasting. Because it can't be, because it's like the right space and the right time. And that's I think why they use like ritual technologies, or what we would understand as magicians to be ritual technologies, in stage performances or in lives or in even in music videos or even in post-production, because it's about continuing your staying power, and then also about attracting downloads or listens or whatever it is. So I think that that yes, definitely people are using magic in and magical ideas anyway in all of these things, but it doesn't necessarily have to be inherently negative. But it's about whether you consume it or not. Like we all, like I know Matt will agree with this, but obviously I'll take what Zan has to say after. But I think that we have our free will and our choice. Like we can choose to engage with it or not. So if you can choose to engage with it, know that that's something that you might get.
Mm. Yeah, and it kind of was interesting when you mentioned Saturn earlier in relation to Binah, and yeah, just Saturn. It's like this. There's so much noise and decoherence, right, in especially modern music, and I think that the more that you work that kind of listening muscle, the more that you can kind of fold everything into and resolve things that are maybe poisonous in some way. You can kind of in your the way that you hear it, you can kind of resolve it into something that's medicinal for you, and so yeah, it really just it is such an inner experience at the end of the day, like the way that you receive the sound, and yeah.
Well, I love that you related it to Saturn, Zen, simply because I'm very interested in the Saturn Jupiter relationship. I think it's not super well articulated necessarily on Astro Twitter or just in the general astrology discourse, as far as I'm aware. But I think it's a really interesting Kabbalistic relationship as well, because you're totally right, is that it happens in the space of our minds. That's what, Binna would grant the sort of quality of contour, of like understanding the context of why we think the way we think, but also you could say the physical sort of capacity of our minds.
Yeah, and just I just wanted to mention one of a jazz musician, Sun Ra, he was like a jazz musician in the 70s, 60s, 70s. Um, and he was very much a magician as well. And really he invoked the Saturn symbology a lot in his just in everything that he did. And he claimed himself to be like an alien from Saturn and all this stuff. And I feel that that Saturnian relationship with music really defines, I think I said this earlier, but just how blues and jazz came to be as this very unique musical style of claiming these very difficult experiences, like if in the blues, emerging from kind of slavery conditions and stuff, and kind of claiming that, and like I said, just kind of this process of making it bending it to your coherence and kind of redefining the information that you're receiving. So I just wanted to call in Sun Ra just because he's one of the few kind of people musicians that also studied the occult and like tried to write about it some, and he was definitely just really early for his time. But and his music is kind of hard to listen to. It's kind of avant-garde jazz, but he made movies and he wrote a lot of poetry, and yeah, I just wanted to bring in Sun Ra.
No, thank you so much, Dan. You know, I shout out to my episode I did on Obeah and like the intersection between reggae and Obeah, because I think that was sort of like, I think that very much is what Zan is talking about in a way, is because hoodoo and root work and all the sort of American Afro-syncretic, but it's not just Afro-syncretic. There's like a lot of different, well, it's obviously syncretic, so there's obviously a lot of different components in it, but largely Afro-syncretic, and it's drawing from the tradition at the same time. So like the music is informing root work as a practice, and then I think also root work is informing blues as sort of like a magical or musical, excuse me, but also magical genre, but a musical genre. And I think also this bleeds over into New Orleans jazz and the sort of New Orleans style voodoo, which is a lot more Catholic than people realize. And I think that I'm glad that you referenced Sun Ra. I think that's an interesting um, figure archetype, you could say, like the musician, magician. And I think that this is very common in like the South America and like certainly in the South, and like this person who's like actively doing magic, crossroads magic a lot of the time, which is interesting, again relating back to Ganapati or the Eshu or King Eshu or even the lesser ones. So and very interesting is because you hear that a lot in blues songs. So I'll have to definitely have you back, Zan and Matt, of course. We'll have to discuss this. We'll have to do an episode on like hoodoo and blues and sort of the Afro-syncretic ideas arising. And Matt can obviously teach us about Kimbanda and all that stuff. Also,
Yeah, there's actually, now that you mentioned, I remembered, in Umbanda mainly. So Umbanda, it's like the more left column, left pillar ways of learning, of using the syncretic spiritualism, African and Catholic thing that was created in Brazil, you can say. So Kimbanda, I think, would be even more left column, but Umbanda is left column in comparison to others. But anyways, they have these things, which I guess if I would translate literally would be the song points. I guess it's weird in English, but in Portuguese would be pontos cantados. So the idea is that you have the different hierarchies, right? Then you have the Exus as a hierarchy of like an egregore of entities. You have the Pombagira, you have Ogun, Eres, etc. You have all the different hierarchies there. And then you have those again musics that you sing, and then again usually they are rhyming, right? And you sing them, and then obviously you have people there performing like with whatever instruments they have at the time, but usually more earth related ones. So not drums, but like the type of instrument that you use your hands. I don't know the name in English, but whatever, you probably know what I mean. And you use that to then enter in the trance and work the specific entities, which at the end of the day they are just quote unquote just the spheres, right? They are like a personification of the spheres. So you may have like Ogun, which could be more of the Martian part of things, and so on. The Eres could be more of the Kether, and so on and so on. So again, making slight correlations in there, but just so you get the idea.
Oh, there's absolutely you're totally spot on, Matt. Like, like I'm flexible like this, like that. I love this that you're kind of mapping it along. Like that's what it should be. That's what people should talk about. And it's also interesting, not to like it's not casting aspersion or anything, but it is interesting that like there's a whole group of modern magicians like Greg Carlwood, Gordon White, the other guy who wrote the Friswald, I think his name is. So he there's all this group of magicians, they're all learning Kimbanda. Like they have an active Kimbanda house in Uruguay. So I just think like there is clearly a Sephardic or Kabbalistic component, because a lot of these people have that as their foundational sort of ideas, since that is like a foundational idea in Golden Dawn and all the institutional kind of magics that they tend to at least dabble in or belong to at first. So I think you're totally right on, Matt. And I think that's really interesting that you're doing that. And I'm actually going to force you into an episode where we discuss the Sephira and perhaps the Lua, or the spirits as they arise, or the Orisha, or whatever it is, or even the courts. That would be a really interesting episode. I think it's very neglected, like the ideas of the spiritual courts, and there's the different numbering systems, just as we talked about in the beginning. And so I think that's kind of the decoherence that even Zan was referring to. There's kind of like a decoherence of true knowledge. And so that can be one boon also of Ganapati or Ganesha, is that he can bring things that are seemingly not extant. He can bring them back into a kind of form. So he could help aggregate the knowledge as it exists, but maybe not resolve or resurrect the knowledge that is forgotten. But maybe that's okay. But maybe because we have enough to sort of make it work, it's just we have to take a more flexible, eclectic. I don't like the word eclectic because that sounds very 90s, like Minneapolis pagan wine mom, but anyways, I'm sorry. Zan, do you want to have the final word?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I mean, I just happy to have this conversation, and there's just so many different directions to kind of go about this, and I feel like we went a lot of them, and I'm just really glad to hear so much of the Ganapati information echoed back, because it's just a deity that I do sadhana with, and I feel like intuitively have been really drawn to, and I feel like it has been so connected to my devotion to music, and I just really glad to hear a lot of the details that I knew that you were going to bring in.
So if I can bring some, it's gonna be quick. I mean, if you guys want to talk on top of it as well, it's fine. But just something that I remembered, which I think it's very interesting. So if we do Kabbalistic reading of the word music, so I'm gonna use the Portuguese version, but it doesn't matter. It's the same root, the same idea. So in Portuguese, we would have música. So we have 3 syllables: mu, z, or si, si, and ka, right? So if we decompose those, we can see it as mu being the same or similar, correlated to the aum that we didn't talk about. I just spoke briefly about it. So the aum, also correlated with the we say in Portuguese lamúrias, which is like whining or wail, which again, if you dig a little bit more, you can even try and connect with the land of Mu or Lemuria, right? So you can see where all this could theoretically, conceptually come from. You have then the SI, so in the word would be musica or music, but you can see the SI, you can play around, so SI may become Is, the same as Isis or Isis, right? The Egyptian goddess. Or you can also see as the I being your spine and the S being the serpent coiled around it. And also we have a note, right? The C note, I think in English, C, so SI, which is, again, the one that some people would correlate with playing at the top of the head. So playing at like the crown chakra. So again, very very, it could like heal, basically, right? So that's one of the ways you can see it, this specific note. And the ka, so again, the ka, I guess you know where I'll say it comes from. So the same as Kabbalah. Not exactly the same, at least the one I use. So it's just one A, but you can understand it as like the body, right? So it's like the analog, the ideas of the earthly men, right? As in comparison with the ba, which would be the more digital side of things. So then if we stitch everything together then with this point of view, we would have the idea of men changing your way of thinking through the waves. So that's one way you can understand Kabbalistically the word music. It's like the
I love
Kabbalistic
that.
etymology.
I love that.
So I just remember that, and I think it would be very interesting to bring it up.
Well, it's very mem. Shout out Joshua. He's been bugging me about the three mothers. But no, it's like that's what it is. It's like it's the receptivity, the creation of the wave, but also its replication, its doubling. That's why it always comes back to Hesed or Jupiter Zan, either or. Loving kindness. That's really what I think, and I think that I think it. But it's important not to stay completely fixed there. Matt's heard me say this a million times, but it's important to be in synthesis. So that's what I think is interesting about music is that it has a quality that you, even though I'm saying that I like it as the internal process, I think it's important in terms of musical production. I think there's an intention there of like a manifest intention for other people to hear it as well. So and enjoy it perhaps, hopefully. And so I think that as an exercise, there perhaps maybe is no greater cultivation, to use a Taoist term, than magical music, in my opinion. It's an art way beyond me. I will never do it in this lifetime, but I'm very impressed by it as a concept and by both of you, of course. And so thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Amazing combo, of course. Matt, please plug what you want to plug, and then I'm going to let Zan actually have the last word. I think it's fair. Both saints, obviously. Zan, you're going to come back. We're going to have a conversation about the blues hoodoo and all that, all the stuff, all the craziness. Matt will come, and so if you want to do that, hopefully, and yeah.
So again, first of all, thanks Jin for having us, and thanks Zen for coming. It was very nice to be in synthesis with you guys. Very cool ideas, and I can say it definitely expanded the way I see how music is magical. So thanks a lot for that. And yes, I am Matt Mora. Again, if you can find me on X at MattMora19. You can find me on YouTube at MattMora19. You can find me on Twitter at MattMora19. You can find me on Instagram at MattMora19. You can also find a very interesting musical related project I did recently. Now I remember to plug. So I mentioned the book, The Archaeometer. I'm doing a translation, but I tried doing a practical use of it. So if you go to thearchaeometer.com, that is archae, so like arc, e-ometer, so archaeometer, thearchaeometer.com, you can find on one of the tabs there a way for you to translate basically a text into notes, and then you can play that and see which kind of melody comes. So again, using the archaeometer, you can correlate letters from in this case, the Latin alphabet with specific notes, and then you can create things. So I think it's a very interesting way. You could say you're finding your soul's song. That's a very nice way to put it. So yeah, definitely check that out if you liked what we talked about today. And now, Zen, please.
Yeah, just really, glad to have this conversation. It's definitely one of the deepest ones that I've had on the subject, and similarly, just feeling very expanded. And and just wanted to close just with one last thought on Ganapatsi that I just wanted to get through. But just that even in how Matt just at the end broke down the etymology for music, the key skill in music is the ability to just break things down into their smallest possible problems and solve those, and reassemble that into a whole. And I feel like that speaks to Ganapati somehow. And I just wanted to call that in, and just, I'm Dapper Zan everywhere, mostly just on Instagram and Twitter. And you can find my link tree there for my podcast. And that's, The Way of Keys is the main thing that I'm on right now. And so hope to be posting there soon. Thanks for having me.